Welcome to the debrief. I'm Donna King. I'm Carolina Journal's editor-in-chief. This is our weekly recap. Everything happening in the news, everything in public policy and politics. You can find all the stories, lots of analysis, great cartoons on carolinajournal.com. But we're going to break it all down here for you as well. Joining us this week on the debrief, Mitch Kokai of the John Locke Foundation. Glad you're here. And of course, Jeff Moore, Carolina Journal's deputy editor, and Teresa Opeka, who covers our executive branch when all of our good Carolina Journal news. All right, we're going to get this thing rolling. Jeff, you have a story on carolinajournal.com this week on NCinnovation. All right, let's hit the top lines. What is this project? Why are we following it so closely?
Yeah, so NCinnovation it's a nonprofit that was put together in 2018, I believe. Okay. They were funded just this last year in the state budget cycle to the tune of about $500 million, which they will receive in two different tranches. This money is for funding grants to research projects among UNC system schools to try and help them along the commercialization path, to get them past proof of concept, get them into a market, have a product and a company, and maintain those companies and that growth here in North Carolina. That's the mission of NCinnovation, and that's the kind of pitch they took to lawmakers last year to get that funding.
$500 million coming from?
So that it is coming from taxpayers. So that it was in the budget. $250 million is already in their accounts at NCinnovation.
Okay.
They have some metrics to hit, which they believe, and they've presented information that they've hit those metrics that are in statute to get the second $250 million tranche, but that will be coming later this year.
Really high stakes.
Yeah, so that's a huge amount of money. Obviously, we've got other budget items in North Carolina for much smaller sums of money that we spend a lot more time talking about as far as a wider kind of media audience and the people of North Carolina. But so this is why we're paying attention to it. It's a lot of taxpayer money.
Okay.
It's to be put toward these grants. They're not investments in the companies themselves, but grants to help them get to a space where they can commercialize and become a professional company instead of kind of dying on the vine. So the latest has been some pilot grants that they did. They approved, the board just last week approved about $5 million for 8 different projects. And so we're going to have more of that on carolinajournal.com and covering some of those projects, kind of diving into what those individual research projects look like, how far along the line they are. I think all 8 of these are actually past the proof of concept stage. So the pitch for NCinnovation was that some of these research projects they die in this valley of death for venture capital. From research to development, there's a gap there, and a lot of them don't make it across that gap. NCinnovation wanted to help them make it across that gap. But it looks like that those first 8 companies were actually well on their way across the gap. We've got one that already had federal grants. They've got grants from Duke Energy. They already have licensure agreements, things of that nature. So we'll be taking a deeper look at the companies that got the pilot grants. It's a pilot that came after they got this huge sum of money. So maybe the pilot is something that they had put in front, and then the argument would have been more powerful. But otherwise, they're actually looking as a board to figure out who is going to manage all of this money as far as an investment. It's going to be set up as an endowment. And then the proceeds from which the investment returns will be used to fund the grants. But there are allowances for drawing down on the corpus, the principal of this money, hypothetically the $500 million. They can draw down as much as $50 million of that in the first year. So with the endowment, it's going to be given to an investment manager. They're going to invest that in different vehicles, and some of that's going to be in equities, things that can really move around. So how much risk are taxpayers going to be put under with the endowment, the investment manager they choose, their investment approach? I would believe that taxpayers would want a safer approach that kind of guarantees the principal of their money that isn't spent, and that would actually be in line with the pitch NCinnovation has made, that this is kind of a safe investment vehicle, and it's just the returns that are going to be used to fund it. There's also an issue with possible conflicts of interest. NCinnovation in statute was required to raise $25 million in private money within 4 years, I believe, and they have announced that they've hit that mark through a lot of private donors to get to $25 million. But some of those givers, the donors, are actually banks, and some of those banks are now making bids to manage the money that NCinnovation has on the market, from which they're going to make a lot of fees and a lot of money. So there are questions and open discussions at the board level of NCinnovation about whether or not they should eliminate all appearances of conflict of interest there, what that could do to limit their options as far as who invests this money, because it turns out a lot of banks actually put toward the project and were convinced of it. So it's going to be some interesting developments here over these next few weeks. I believe that they want to pick an investment manager within the next 90 days or so. So we'll be following that on CarolinaJournal.com, obviously, and bringing you the latest there, and also diving in to those pilot grants and to give extra accountability and eyeballs to what the taxpayers are going to be funding.
Sure. Mitch, I got to ask you, one of the things that we've talked a lot about this project around the newsroom, and it's not the first time Carolina Journal and the John Locke Foundation have seen some red flags in these big high-dollar pilot programs, these big projects. Is there a red flag here for you, or does it warrant this kind of scrutiny?
Well, it definitely warrants this kind of scrutiny. And just to remind people, the reason that this really came on the radar for the John Locke Foundation was in an earlier version, back when this was first discussed, there was an idea from the state Senate to spend well over $1 billion, something like $1.4 billion out of a general fund budget that's about $30 billion for this project that no one had ever heard of before.
Right.
Jeff mentioned it had been around for a few years, but people really hadn't heard much about this. And the idea was basically out of the blue for the state Senate, well, let's give it $1 billion. And people said, well, whoa. So a lot of what's being discussed now is thanks to some of the scrutiny that has come about since the initial talks about this, the fact that it was cut back down to $500 million, which is still a lot of money, but that's a third of what they were talking about before, in 2 separate payments, and then a lot of new additional safeguards that were built in that Jeff is keeping track of.
Yeah.
Exactly, that he's keeping track of. But still, the concern that the organization, the John Locke Foundation, has is that you're talking about not paying for university research, which is fine. University research is important, and there's been funding for it. But turning this university research into profit-making businesses where the profit is not going to go to the taxpayers. The taxpayers are helping to make money for future businesses. And I think that there's a sort of a disconnect between why would the taxpayers be funding this and why is this something that shouldn't just be the private sector saying, oh, look at this great university research. Right. Let's take our money or our investors, private investors' money, and make sure that this crosses the valley of death. That's basically the way the economy is supposed to work, not for the government to pick winners and losers. And then beyond picking the winners and losers, having the wins be for private profit-making groups and not for the taxpayers.
Very interesting. All right. We are certainly going to be following all of this throughout the process, particularly as we look at the state budget here in the short session. Mitch, actually, I'm going to come right back to you if that's all right. Tell me some updates on the judicial watch that we've really been paying close attention to on Carolina Journal.
Yeah, there are all kinds of interesting things always happening in the courts, but 2 things that we're going to draw attention to today. One, 4 years after the main thrust of the COVID pandemic, we are still seeing COVID play out in North Carolina's courts, and it did in 2 interesting ways within the last week. Just today, Governor Roy Cooper has petitioned the state Supreme Court to take up this case involving the shutdowns that he had of bars back in 2000 during the height of the pandemic. The State Court of Appeals ruled in April that bar owners could move forward with their lawsuit against Cooper because the appeals court said that by shutting down bars and keeping them shut down when he reopened businesses, that he was violating the bar owners' rights to the enjoyments of the fruits of their own labor, which is a state constitutional provision, also the equal protection of the laws. Cooper is saying, no, that's wrong. State Supreme Court, you should step in and reverse that. This comes within a week after the NC Chamber, which is the largest business lobbying group in North Carolina, has filed a brief to support the UNC system in another COVID-related case. There are 2 different COVID-related cases out of UNC. One involves the shutdown of all of the campuses during the spring 2020 semester and trying to get some partial refunds from moving to in-person to online learning. Now, a state law was passed that helped protect UNC against just this lawsuit, and the lawsuit is challenging that law, saying it's unconstitutional. There is the state Supreme Court is taking up that case. UNC system is fighting against it, and now the NC Chamber is supporting the UNC system on that front. There's a second lawsuit that deals only with UNC and NC State for the following semester, because you'll remember that they were the only campuses that didn't go back to in person.
Right.
And so a couple of students have filed suit about that, saying, why are we paying for campus lab fees and all this other stuff when we couldn't even go to campus?
Sure.
So the state Supreme Court is going to be dealing with both of those cases. No real details on when, but we do know that the new development was the NC Chamber has decided to back the UNC system on that first suit dealing with spring 2020. Now, the third case I want to mention, just because it got quite a bit of social media buzz this week, it was a case out of the State Court of Appeals, and it dealt with a homeless man who went to UNC hospitals in 2021 to get some treatment. I believe it was on his kidneys.
Okay.
He is homeless, so all of his possessions are with him. They're in his vehicle. He parks his vehicle near the UNC hospitals, so it's on campus, a campus parking lot. Someone from the hospital saw the vehicle, which must have looked a little out of the ordinary, because they contacted campus police and said, hey, there's a suspicious vehicle. An officer comes over. He finds the guy in his car, talks to him. He asks him, what do you have in your car? Do you have any guns in your car? The guy said yes, and he helped him find the guns. And after he found these 6 guns in his car, he charged him with having guns on an educational property, which is there's a state law against that. Sure. So the guy goes to trial, gets convicted, ends up getting a suspended sentence, but it's on a year of probation, but appeals, saying, look, this law is unconstitutional. The State Court of Appeals just ruled this week that as applied to these circumstances, that law was unconstitutional for this homeless man. Right. And so they threw out the conviction against him. There's been quite a bit of interest in this.
That is interesting.
And
his home.
Right. That was his home, and that was one of the reasons. One of the judges. There were a couple of parts of this case. One of them was, did he even know he was on educational property? And there's some dispute about that, whether he knew or not. One of the judges said, no, he had to know, because all the signs are blue. He's right by Keenan Stadium. Right, he's got to know he's on campus. But the other 2 judges said they weren't really sure of that. But all 3 of them agreed that in this circumstance, a guy driving to the hospital, parking his car, just leaving the guns in his car, that was not the instance where you charge someone with bringing a gun onto an educational property.
I wonder if that means that down the road, if a kid is sleeping in his car for classes and that kind of thing, that would apply. Is that a precedent?
It is a Court of Appeals decision, so there is precedent, but there are very distinct circumstances here, and the way that the ruling came down, it was as applied to this individual. So if someone else were trying to rely this on precedent, they would have to say that the circumstances were very similar to the circumstances of this case.
Very interesting. Now, going back, if we could, to the lawsuits from students. I have a particular interest in this because my kids went to NC State. I had 2 at NC State during the COVID shutdowns. What's your sense of have you gotten any idea of how the court might find this? Is there some history to it that we might be able to draw some conclusions?
It's really hard to say because we haven't even held the arguments yet in these cases. And there are 2 separate ones. One, the first one, dealing with the shutdown in spring of 2020, that one is significant in the sense that the General Assembly passed a law specifically giving the UNC system legal protection against this type of lawsuit. They said, look, things that were done during the height of COVID in the spring of 2020, we're going to give you protection from that. This lawsuit is challenging that, saying, no, you can't do that. This is breach of a contract. This law is unconstitutional. And so the court will have to decide whether the General Assembly had the right to pass that kind of law. The other case from the fall of 2020 is a little bit different because there was no state law giving immunity to the UNC system, and UNC and NC State stand out as the only campuses that didn't go back. And so I think that case probably is going to come down to a little bit different legal reasoning than the first case. The first case is all about whether that law that the General Assembly passed is constitutional or not. In the other case, it's going to be more of a sense of, is there some sort of breach of contract here? Are the students having to pay for something that they thought they were going to get that they didn't get? And is that something that the university is going to have to be on the hook for. Now, on the case of the shutdown in spring of 2020, one of the interesting developments within recent weeks is that the university's lawyers have put a price tag on it. They've said if they have to repay these refunds, it's going to be about $260 million. So that's a big bill if they end up losing.
Very interesting, like an endowment size. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah,
you can take the NCinnovation money and pay off.
Just saying. Do you think there's some lessons learned from this? Because we all remember that people were panicking, people were freaking out. We're given all kinds of immunity for laws and actions by elected leaders during that time. Cool heads in a crisis. Do you think there's some lessons from this?
Yeah, and maybe not the takeaway, like lessons for the general public. As I'm sitting here thinking that. Well, they can do things that really blatantly violate like some basic mores that we have and thought we had protection on. But if it's enough of a panic, then those things get suspended. Right. I think that's kind of an undermining of like the trust we have in our system and stuff. And so when you see trust in institutions and those levels and like they're really kind of tanked, things like this play into this. It's like, well, you can't come back to campus, but you still have to pay your full tuition. Right. And at the same time, lawmakers are saying, and you can't sue them for this at the same time. So
here's your basketball tickets, but you can't go.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. So there are some hard lessons to learn about what government is capable of doing, really, and maybe that will inform some of the moves we make in voting booths going forward. Yeah. Kind of the impressions we give about what we care about as far as priorities at elections.
Right. Very interesting. I find that this generation, my kids' age, are very suspicious of government intervention and very suspicious of authority. And I think some of it really comes from our COVID, some of the COVID decisions that we made.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing. I actually am impressed with them. Yeah. It's very Gen X. Maybe we've got a cycle, right? Yeah, of course. Let's jump to your story. This is another one. So suspicion of, government intervention, and we're all headed to the beach. So there's a little good Venn diagram here. Tell us what you got.
Sure. So there is a proposed rule that, if it passed, would devastate the North Carolina economy and also the economy up and down the eastern seaboard.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a mouthful. It's the North Atlantic Right Whale Vessel Strike Reduction Rule. Say that fast.
Okay. Yeah, no kidding. It sounds got Biden administration all over it.
Yeah. So what it would do, it would restrict vessels greater than or equal to 35 feet and less than 65 feet in length to go the speed of 10 knots or 11 miles per hour. Basically, the speed of a bicycle.
That's not a huge, that's a big boat, but it's not, that's a charter, that's a fishing vessel.
Right. Yeah. Right. So they would slow it down. And it would happen during the calving season up and down the eastern seaboard, which is like November to May.
Okay.
And NOAA proposed it, but that's what they're saying because they're the North Atlantic right whale is endangered.
Got it.
There's been some incidents with boats, they say, up and down the eastern seaboard, killing the whales, unfortunately.
So this rule would apply to the entire eastern seaboard, including North Carolina?
From Massachusetts all the way down to central Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. So did speak to Frank Hugelmeyer. He is the president and CEO of National Marine Manufacturers Association. He said if this passed, it would risk about 812,000 jobs nationally, and have a tremendous impact on the $84 billion coastal economy. For North Carolina, that impact is $9.1 billion.
Wow.
And also 1,000 businesses and a little over 28,000 jobs would be affected.
So where is this rule in the process?
Right now, it went on to, I think it's sitting in the one department, and they had as of today to discuss that. It might be eligible for the Congressional Review Act, which would make it a lot easier to pass.
Okay.
I haven't heard any updates yet, but today is the deadline for that. But who knows? We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If anybody is concerned about that, I talked to a recreational fishing boat owner. It would take 30% of his income away for the year. It really would devastate him. If you are, call Congress, call the White House. There's a link in the article that I wrote because it could have really, really devastating impacts on the economy and a ripple effect. Not only like boating, fishing, there's fishing derbies. There's anybody who sells tackle, any in the boating industry is huge in North Carolina. It would have a big ripple effect.
Wow. And you're a beach guy. We're talking about no deep sea charters off the coast of North Carolina until after May, right?
Yeah. Well, it would just really be a huge pain in their neck. They wouldn't be able to do as much. What would be the way that the coast of North Carolina is set up is it takes a long distance to actually get offshore into deep water to where you're doing that kind of fishing.
Sure.
So it extends their travel time by 50, 60, 70% in some instances. And so they're just not able to actually do as much fishing. So if you're going to pay a few $1,000s for a fishing charter, you and your buddies going down for the weekend, you're hitting restaurants, you're buying things, you're staying in a hotel.
Sure.
You want to do a lot of fishing. You don't want to spend 6 hours getting out there and 6 hours getting back and fishing for 3 hours. That's not really what you signed up for. And there's not a lot of the actual interactions among these boats. And that size range...
That was my next question, yeah.
That size range is the sweet spot. That is what charter boats are, these big sport fishing boats. Some they get over 65 feet, but most of them are within that 35 to 65-foot range.
Okay.
And they take people offshore. And it is a big business in some of these local coastal communities. And this would be truly devastating. And then there's all these knock-on effects for it because you have kind of a tourist environment, people that kind of actually flock to. You can go to the Morehead City waterfront, other waterfronts around North Carolina. At the end of the day, when the charter boats are coming back and they're coming in and they're cleaning fish, and it becomes a thing. And it's a heritage kind of industry.
Sure.
So it's a real threat. And the boat captain that you spoke to really kind of put some numbers on it as far as how devastating this could be. And that's just going to be a giant pain, all for something that doesn't look like it has any real efficacy, because I think the rate of the sport fishing boats hitting right whales are very, very low.
Very low.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, they're whales.
Right.
Yeah.
One other thing that Frank Hugelmeyer told me that NOAA is going back in time to see if anybody has violated this, and they are fining people thousands of dollars, which is
even before the rule comes
into effect, which is a little unethical,
right?
To say. I mean, they're doing all that. They're trying to find out if that actually people have done that. There's ways to track people. But like he said, they are working. There's sonar on these boats already. There's another rule that they're trying to, another legislation they're trying to pass to help that, expand sonar, make it better, all of that. They are trying to work with this. But he said, they liken this to someone saying, out west, you're going to hit a beaver that might be going across the road at 5 miles an hour. You're telling people to stop, you got to let the beaver go by. He was likening it to that.
Sure.
It really has, these, as you mentioned, they really don't have an effect on this. It's the larger boats or smaller boats that go faster that would have more of an effect. Also, too, there's incidental take permits for windmill manufacturers that they are allowing out there in the ocean. He said there was
if you make solar or wind power,
the windmills they want to put in wind power for the oceans. That Captain Greg Meyer, who I spoke to, he said when he went to file his complaint online on the NOAA website, that he saw that they have so many incidental take permits. They're allowing them to have that. It's by accident. Okay, they hit a whale or something happens. They're allowing it, but it's like a double standard. He said, because we don't do that. We don't have any contact with a whale, but they're allowing them so much of an intake, so
great.
Double standard all the way around.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, good intentioned, I guess, trying to save a whale, but this is literally a save the whale situation.
It really is one of those cases of unintended consequences.
Sure.
Because you hear save the whales, you think, okay, if it's a good idea, let's go ahead and save them.
Sure.
But the idea seems to be going way beyond what you would need to do to save the whales.
Sure.
It would have a devastating economic impact, which is kind of a theme.
Without working.
That's right. Which is kind of a theme from big government. It's let's have these ideas, let's throw them out there. They're going to have a devastating impact, and they probably won't have an actual positive effect on things like climate change.
Right.
You could, as someone once said, North Carolina could fall off the edge of the country, and it would have no impact on the climate. So why do we have to have EVs and all these other crazy things that aren't going to do anything to help the climate? Same thing is probably happening here with the whales, that you would have this devastating economic impact, but not have any positive impact on saving these whales, who are supposed to be what you're after.
Right. Very interesting.
One other noteworthy piece is that I did reach out to Governor Cooper, Attorney General Josh Stein, who is running for governor in that Democrat ticket, and Mark Robinson, who's the current lieutenant governor, also running for the Republican ticket.
Okay.
The only person that responded was Mark Robinson.
Okay.
I said it would have obviously a devastating impact on the economy. It's something that the Biden administration really has no place in doing, but since this is going to have such an impact on North Carolina's economy, coastal economy, we're talking thousands of jobs.
Sure.
I'm surprised we did not hear from Governor Josh Stein.
I am too. Well, maybe still to come. Maybe.
There was another funny story. Give this before we wrap up today. There was an audit last week from State Auditor Jessica Holmes on the town of Fremont.
Okay.
It was a very unusual case where there were people living in town hall with their pets.
Living?
Yes.
In town hall?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I got to hear this one.
Yes, they were living in town hall with their pets. I guess it was to anchor a business or try to, get a business to come in. They were doing a promotion. The mayor and the town administrator were like, you could live here.
This is a promotion?
Well, they wanted to lure this business to come to the town. So that's what they did. Not only, you could live here, they installed a new shower, a hot water heater. They were making food there. They were doing all that kind of stuff. It was really, really wacky to see in town hall, among other things. But it cost thousands of dollars. It was for the town. It was just a really funny story.
That is crazy.
Check that online too on CarolinaJournal.com. We did an article on that, but.
Okay, that is crazy. Make sure you look at that story on CarolinaJournal.com, and we'll be right back here Thursday with more news, everything that's happening from Raleigh every single week, and you can see everything else that you need to see on CarolinaJournal.com for all of our opinion and analysis, great cartoons. Thanks for joining us.